All right, and it looks like we are live. So welcome everybody. Just going to go ahead and post the message in the chat. As soon as you see that, please go ahead and respond. When I see some responses, I'll know that we are in fact live. So waiting for a couple of those to come in. So as you join, please let us know your role and your organization. I see more people coming in. Morning, Nick. Waiting for a couple more responses here. Just want to make sure that we are in fact live. Could be a bit of a delay. So go ahead and let us know your role and organization in the chat, please. Perfect. Okay, excellent. There we go. I see for some reason all the messages are coming through as private, and I'm not sure why that is. I'll ask one of my colleagues just to have a look at that in the back end. But good morning, everybody, and welcome to the final Finance Indaba Network webinar of the year. This morning session is going to be a really exciting one, and we're going to be focusing on some of those pain points that we all experience as finance professionals and CFOs. So this morning we're going to be in talks with one of our Finance Indaba partners. We'll be working with EWX, also known as Enterprise Works. They've been around since about 2003, and they are specialists in business intelligence, data management, and app development. They've worked with some of South Africa's biggest companies like Spar, MultiChoice, Mr. Price, FNB, Deloitte, Clicks, AB InBev, and Barloworld. So to kick things off, Ian, I'd like to invite you onto camera, please, if you can turn your camera on. Ian is the former Group FD at FedEx and former CIO at the JD Group and Ellerines, and he's the current product and service advocate at Enterprise Works. So welcome, Ian.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to meet everybody.
Yeah, good to have you here. And we'll also be speaking to Trevor. So Trevor, if I can ask you to jump on camera as well, please. So Trevor's a former systems and IT manager over at AVI and Cispro. He's also worked at Vesuvius and Forgood, and is the current strategic business and product manager at Enterprise Works. So welcome, Trevor. And you're on mute, Trevor, so you'll just need to come off mute real quick.
Sorry, morning.
There we go, perfect, thanks so much. We are also joined by Barry, and Barry is the former systems and solutions architect over at 6D Solutions and Derange Consulting, and is the current CTO over at Lombard Insurance. Welcome, Barry.
Morning, all.
Good morning. I'm just going to ask one of my colleagues to have a look at the settings here, because it looks like all the chat messages are coming in private for some reason. I'm not sure if anybody else can see those, but please could you go ahead and just have a look at that in the back end. So let's go ahead and kick these things off. So we know that there are these 5 specific pain points that most finance professionals struggle with. And I'm going to go ahead and post the first one in the chat. So this is all about extracting data from various accounting systems for multiple entities with different financial periods. So I'm sure you can relate to some of these frustrations in the chat. So let's start off here. I'm going to come to you first, Ian. So one of the main challenges that we experience when it comes to financial reporting is just the ability to extract the data from the various different systems. We know that there's also multiple entities with different financial periods. So I'd like to hear from you how EWX achieves this, and could you give us some practical examples?
Yeah, so I think anybody who's been in a large corporate, typically will have a number of general ledger systems within that environment, different subsidiaries, different reporting periods. So what we've set out to do is what we set out to do is essentially try and abstract financial reporting away from the actual operational systems and various general.
Okay.
And I think we've done that very successfully, and that includes things like consolidating entries, because in any large corporate where you're doing consolidations, you typically have standardized consolidating entries. You've got elimination of intercompany accounts, and to do that in a particular general ledger, becomes quite painful sometimes.
Sure.
And that's the reason for the existence of products like ours, and products like the very expensive Oracle Hyperion. Right? So we believe that we have a very viable solution to manage those problems.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks so much. Trevor, anything you'd like to add to that? And you're on mute, Trevor.
About that. So we've spent a lot of time working with organizations in terms of large sets of data, complex data, and as Ian alluded to, multiple financial periods, being able to work through the complexity of consolidating all of that, getting it to the customer as near real time as possible. That's been one of our aims. We've spent a good portion of the last 2 years building out frameworks and product sets in that space to enable that for our customers.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Barry and Trevor. Sorry, thank you, Ian and Trevor. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the dashboards and how we kind of see that data in real time.
Well, what we've done from our point, we've worked with some fairly large organizations, creating automated income statements, balance sheets, cash flows, and then also the drill down into your submodules. So it's not just that flat income statement, balance sheet, but that ability to drill down from the top level all the way into your financial hierarchy, going down into your submodule. So if you want to understand, for example, where somebody received a purchase order and added an extra zero on a cost accidentally, that changes your cost of sale. Well, we can hit that exact entry and then look all the way top from bottom up as to where it's actually gone in your GL, or if you want to understand that transactions all the way from the GL down to that, we can do that as well. Being able to have that near real-time income statement, balance sheet, cash flow, these are things that it should be a given. And we've taken a long time to being able to see customers constantly struggling through that monthly process of 2, 3, 4 days, extracting, putting that together, working through Excel spreadsheets to get that. We've automated all.
Okay, stunning. I think we're going to hear a lot about that automation process in this morning's webinar. Ian, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think, we talk about real time, and I think real time is a question of preference, right? A lot of CFOs would prefer not to actually have their numbers changing all the time. However, should you wish to actually have real-time or near real-time information, we can accommodate that through streaming financial information on a bus and doing real-time ETL off an event bus. So we can actually accommodate a scheduled ETL, or we can accommodate a real-time ETL via an event bus.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing that. Barry, I want to turn the conversation over to you because you are obviously a EWX customer, and you can tell us if Ian and Trevor are in fact telling the truth. But I'd like to hear a little bit more about your journey. So obviously, you had multiple partners to choose from. You went ahead and you did select EWX as a partner. So I'd love to know what led you to that decision or choice.
No, 100%. Thanks. Yeah, so we actually kept it quite simple. We put a dartboard up on the wall with various companies' names on it, and we threw a dart at it.
You've obviously got a very good aim, hey?
Yeah, I got a good aim. No, jokes aside. I think one of the things that has obviously been part of our journey with EWX and led us to sort of aligning ourselves with EWX is sort of the let's say the end-to-end or journey skill set that comes as part of the team, and sort of the close relationship we've built over a number of years now. And a lot of what they're sort of mentioning now, I think key is that you don't get perfect data maturity and you don't get a perfect solution out the box on day one. You have to be on board with the journey, and you have to be aware of where you sit in the data maturity lifecycle of whether it's accounting data or third-party data or pulling accounting data from multiple systems. And I think that's probably been very key for us, is that we didn't, pre-world of us, yes, Excel based and multiple different systems and manual capture and triple checking financial statements, etc. And we didn't turn that off overnight. We had to first, we automated a lot of the data through the ETL process into central data warehouse, working very closely, obviously, with EWX, both from a consulting product perspective and a sort of on-site team perspective to ensure we deliver that requirements. And I think the post in the relationship of where we are now is that, we're starting to see the right business questions being answered on top of the data and the technology that's delivering that data. And I think that's probably part of the key in the relationship of why it's worked so well with EWX to date.
Awesome, thanks a lot. Can you share a practical example, maybe sharing some of the frustrations or challenges that you experienced before moving to EWX?
So I think one of the key frustrations for us has been, and it sounds simple when you say it, but it actually is, I think it's a real world problem even today in other sections for us, especially, is sort of the concept of, master data or single source of truth. To Trevor's point of, if someone's gone and edited a number, and even if they did it accidentally, and then you've got two different numbers that two different team members are using, and then you're going to spend days, weeks, months, whatever it is, finding out that you've got an edit issue because you actually had two different versions of one number, as a very simple example. So we've been working very hard at the concept of master data, the concept of a single source of truth, and then further to that, the concept of ensuring that each business person in different teams understands the meaning of a data element, and that is probably a frustration that we're starting to get rid of, especially in the finance space, and the ability to know that even if business are pulling multiple different reports, they're still using the same number when you get into the granularity of that data.
Okay, awesome. So it's definitely helping you see that one version of the truth and that consistency across the board.
Yeah, 100%. And you can track up and down the pipeline of that data to show where it's changed, where it's not. You've got the auditability, the ETL shows you everything. You're running off a central data environment, even though you're consuming data from X number of different data sources, but you don't have to impact business operational data in terms of the actual accountants doing their day job. So I think that's sort of key, and for us, very critical when it comes to long month-end journeys and long sort of annual financial statement. Time it takes to put these statements and data together.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Thanks.
Just like to add one thing there, right?
Sure. Go for it.
I mean, the criticalness of that, right, is, and I'm sure everybody's been a CFO and been in either an exco or board meeting, right, and somebody questions why sales, right, on one board pack doesn't agree to sales on a different board pack, right, and then everybody rushes around trying to see what that difference is, right. And it turns out often that the difference is different in definition of sales, right? And that's by way of example. What we've been able to do is actually standardize those measures so that everybody is actually working off the same measure, and that is critical, right, in terms of wasting time, right, and avoiding embarrassment, right, in those meetings, right. And sure. I've been the victim of that many a time.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks so much. We're going to go ahead and open up a poll now. So you'll see this appear in the chat. So go ahead and let us know, what accounting system are you currently using? And you'll see the options there. If the option that you're using isn't listed, you can go ahead and type the system that you're using in the chat. So we'll keep that open for a little bit. And then Barry, Ian, and Trevor, if you want to see those results coming through, you just go ahead and click on polls over on the right. There's a clear front runner here at the moment. We'll give you about another 10 seconds or so to complete that. All right, looks like most of those responses are in. Perfect. So what are some of your thoughts and reflections, Trevor and Ian, as you look at that? Looks like Xero's a clear front runner there.
Yeah, so I think Xero is a great GL, right? We use it internally as well. The really cool thing about Xero and Sage, for instance, and also ACPAC, is they've got a really comprehensive and well-defined set of APIs, making it really, really easy to integrate and pull data out of them. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think anybody wanting to implement a financial system on top of those, this becomes very, very easy. One thing to note is, so for instance, Xero is a great base general ledger system, but it doesn't really do consolidations that well, right? And that's where we start to come in, because we could then, if you had 5 or 6 companies that were actually running on Xero, we'd be putting information into a consolidated environment and allowing you to put your consolidation entries through there and any adjustments, and ultimately tagging, right, those adjustments as well. So one of the things we're looking at is the ability to put comments on things like the reason for a variance. And often what happens is people discuss the reason for a budget variance. That's noted down in the minutes, but 2 months later we go down and you're reviewing the historical data, and somebody says, "But what happened 2 months ago?" And then everybody's scratching around for the same stuff. Whereas we could have that online right there, for reference purposes.
Okay. Trev, anything you'd like to add? Just come off mute quick.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit biased. I obviously come from a Cisco background. I worked for Cisco globally and managed a lot of these types of projects from a product view and from a customer engagement point of view. And the beauty of what we've done is that we've built a set of platforms that allow us to be ERP agnostic.
Okay.
And that's the strength of what we've done here, is we're allowing ourselves to consolidate not just one ERP system, but multiple. So organizations that are sitting where you're using SAP in one space, a little bit of Oracle in another space, Cispro. Yeah. So we can consolidate all those bits of data into our platform and then give you sort of that combined income statement, balance sheet across all entities, not just trying to get financial reporting for one entity at a time. You want to separate that by division, cost center, department, store, whatever the case may be. We cater for that.
Okay, awesome. I guess that goes back to what we were saying earlier around the one version of the truth. So when that's all integrated into one kind of dashboard, I mean, you see everything there in one screen. That's awesome. Perfect. Thanks so much. The second area that we know leads to a lot of frustration for finance professionals, I've just gone and typed that in the chat. So it's all about recreating monthly, quarterly, and annual reports using spreadsheets. We all know that it's very tedious and very time consuming as well. So I'm going to go ahead and open up another poll for us. So go ahead and respond to that now for us real quick, please. So are you currently doing this manually, or is your financial reporting, is it an automated process? Okay, interesting. Give you some more time there. Give you about another 5 seconds or so. All right, let's go ahead and end that. So we can see that the large majority of our audience here are still facilitating that manually. So let's expand on that a little bit. And then let us know, how do you actually integrate this, this info? So is it through Excel? Is it through some sort of software tech? So let's go ahead and ask that as well. Go ahead and respond to that for us too, please. I think we know the answer here with lots of people doing that manually. Okay. Give you a couple more seconds there. All right, so we can see that 66% of our audience are Excel gurus, and that's the next topic that I want to expand on. So we know that it's a common frustration for finance professionals is just pulling all these reports and sorting them. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit more about how EWX has simplified this and made the process a little bit more easier and accessible?
So, this is the typical sort of result you expect from this type of poll. I once walked into an organization where a group of accountants that were the best Excel experts that I've ever encountered, and they made things work. And in their environment, they considered that automated as well. Except when you had a broken reference, a VLOOKUP not working, sheet named correctly, and you had to spend time troubleshooting, fixing, understanding. We've taken all of that away. If you want your stuff in Excel, yes, you can export any of the data from the base systems into Excel. You can export any of your sort of dashboards into Excel, but you're working on one version of the truth.
Okay.
We've created standardized, like I've said previously, a standardized set of data warehouse, if you call that allow us to stream that data from your source system into our warehouse, pull that into dashboards, and now you're sitting with sort of that automated approach that doesn't depend on Excel. And yes, if you need to then add additional, so for example, you want to do provisions, consolidated entries, you want to add some notes. We work off the Power Platform environment. We're Microsoft Gold Partner certified, and within that space, we encourage the use of Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate. These are the tools that are making citizen developer sound cool and cool. And we're actually bringing that to life and showing our customers that within the space, yes, it can be that easy.
Okay. Anything you'd add to that, Ian?
Yeah, look, I think, Excel has traditionally been used by accountants and CFOs for a very, very long time. But we know that you very quickly in any organization of any size, you'll get to Excel hell, right? And there are issues around version control, right? There are issues around, auditing. How do you know that those formulas are 100% correct, right? Consistent, all right?
Yeah.
And Excel spreadsheets are really, really prone to error, right? And difficult to debug. So as much as Excel is a great tool, and I advocate using Excel in many instances, to do your financial reporting, right, it becomes quite problematic. Particularly where you've got things like you've got management accounts versus audited financial accounts, right? And then reconciling these two. Typically, those are two different models.
Okay.
Then when you look at the audited financials, sometimes they don't agree to the management accounts, right? And because there's a little entry that's been snuck away somewhere, right, to the provisions, and then everybody's confused, right? And then the guy who did it leaves, all right, and he's got it tucked away in some formula somewhere in the spreadsheet, and then you start building the spreadsheets again, right? And that's a real problem.
Sure. Now I know why you referred to it as Excel hell as well. So when we open up the session, I mentioned some of the partners and clients that you're currently working with. So either Trevor or Ian, with the exception of Lombard, because that's why Barry's here, could you perhaps share a case study or one of the partners that you've worked with and some of the challenges that you helped them solve?
So, without divulging too much, so we've recently just deployed the full spec of EPM, which is your full spec of financial reporting that encompasses all of the organization for the likes of the core group. And that's a large retailer that's got a lot of moving parts, a lot of transactions, large sets of data. And now they're sitting in a situation where they're able to see their full balance sheet, their cash flow, all their budgeting. We enable them to also do sort of forecasting piece around that as well, so that they can actually change the actual forward view of their organization, and all built off what's considerably a simple data set. And we manage the complexity on the dashboarding side of things, and we're building further onto that. So, and the end result is what you want to do is you want to be able to say, I can view my income statement, all my financials at any point in the month, any day of the week, and then have a simple extract that says, here's my management pack. Click of a button, I should be exporting that into management pack with my notes, commentaries, anything like that.
Okay, awesome. Thanks a lot, Trevor. Ian, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think the core group have actually, come a long way, right? They definitely were in Excel hell, right? I think right now they're able to cut the time required to produce a set of results at the end of the month quite dramatically, right? And with far more accuracy and consistency than they were before.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you so much.
Just to add on that.
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, just to add on that. So being able to delve into the other little pieces around the company balancing and stuff becomes really, really simple now, because you've got all that data. We can define the criteria of things that we want to investigate over and above just traditional income statement, balance sheet, trial balances, and stuff like that. So we've recently just taken care of a full set of intercompany balancing with them that builds into this piece that now means that an accountant that was sitting there 2-3 days a week making sure the intercompany balances are in place and the right invoices and credits were done, that's gone. It's a simple hour of his week and he's
yeah, and definitely more accurately as well. Perfect. So I'm going to come to you next, Barry. Perhaps some of us on the call here, you can advise us. What are some of the challenges that you are currently experiencing? What is your Excel hell or nightmare? And then Barry, I'd like to hear from you a little bit more about the Lombard journey and the use of EWX over at Lombard. How's that made your life easier?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Two good questions. I think in terms of Excel, I actually think it's a really interesting question, and we've often had a number of long and colorful, let's put it that way, debates around Excel. And the reality of, even when you have the most powerful BI tools and you've got a very tech-orientated, educated business team, you still have Excel in your environment.
Sure.
And I think we've learned that you're not going to get rid of Excel, but it's about ensuring that you use it correctly. And I think both to Ian and Trevor's point is that you don't want Excel being the source of the data. And I think that's the key thing that we've changed and are still changing. It's a constant journey, and especially in some of our different departments where Excel is there for a reason, and business are very comfortable with it, and they use it to do a lot of maybe their own validation, their own calculation checks. It takes business time to trust, reporting and technology and the tools, so that you've got to give them the power to get that comfort going. But at the same time, Excel can't be that source of the data. And if you can have your tool set correct with the functionality business needs, then they use Excel where they should be, and then they don't use it for building reports 5 times over and calculation errors and stuff like that. So I think that's probably my comment around Excel. And when you get, as Trevor says, when you get hardcore users that know Excel more than the people who wrote Excel, then you suddenly realize that it's a very powerful tool, but the problem is to maintain or support that is physically impossible. So I think, that's sort of where I see Excel. That's a very interesting one. In terms of the journey that we've, and then potentially, tying it into this sort of topic around Excel and multiple multiple versions and multiple spreadsheets, trying to maintain it. The journey that EWX has sort of delivered for us is that ability to build a centralized structured, defined data environment that we can, constantly deliver data to the business. We don't run real time. We run about let's call it daily to keep it simple. But even daily data has its own complexities, and a combination of both high-end skills from a ETL warehouse cloud environment to a set of tool sets that I think we try and use our tools strategically to save manpower, let's call it, and ensure we're using the resources correctly. A combination of those two ensures that we're running let's call it a real-time or daily environment that at any point in time my business can see the latest set of numbers and sort of to continue sort of that journey of evolving. And I think part of that is that we're now at the point where the road we've walked with EWX is maturing to the point where we are now looking at strategic projects rather than how do I support a data warehouse environment that has daily ETL processes that run through the night. That's now mature. Now, like, how do we strategically use this data to build AI models and to build group financial reporting across all of our companies in one view? How do I give the actuaries access to group data without having to look at 5 different accounting systems? Those are the types of conversations where we're getting to now and are in now, rather than where do I find the data? What do we do with the data? How do we explain the data? So I think that's part of the journey, and tying back to that, Excel versus toolset type view of the data.
I like what you said about that kind of automation part, where it frees up finance professionals just to be a little bit more strategic and use their skill set better elsewhere, rather than sort of performing these manual tasks and Excel hell.
Yep, 100%.
Perfect. So let's move on to the third pain point or frustration that some of us appear to have, and that's all around limited or no ability to drill down into some of the details. So let's start again here. We often hear that data is the new oil and there's so much information at our disposal. So I'd like to come to you, Trevor. Maybe you can share with us, what are some of the ways that you can use data for insights and pulling information? And then a follow-up to that would be, do you believe organizations should be able to record their data on their balance sheet as an asset?
It's an interesting question. We spoke earlier about this, and I've been doing a bit of like keep your finger on the pulse type thing around innovation cultures in the fintech space. In 2016, the Financial Accounting Standards Board assembled a group of researchers to start studying and updating sort of accounting tools in this space. More recently, Douglas B. Denny from Gardner came up with a book called Infonomics, and they talk here about understanding the value of your data so that you can actually understand the value of your organization and the value that your data has for your organization, so that you could potentially get to a point where you're talking about adding it to your balance. The reality is that there's two types of data. There's common data that everybody kind of should have access to, stock listings, for example, But there's other pieces of data that should not be for the public domain, that's internal to your organization. How do you measure that? Well, the Infonomics talks about one of the types of measures you can consider so that you can start valuing the data in your organization and start creating that momentum towards valuing your data, and whether it actually will talk to the actual value of your organization. It's like the conversation of Coke and goodwill. No one's going to really go and purchase Coke right now because of the value, not just of the product, but of the name and what they represent.
Sure.
It's trying to get to that point with data.
Okay. Cool. Thanks, Trev. Ian, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sure. I think, putting data on the balance sheet's a particularly difficult thing. I think most accountants would agree. It's probably tantamount to actually trying to value goodwill, which is. But I think data as an asset, definitely, and if one looks at Barry's example, we're currently looking at working with an agri-bank, right, where the financial data actually becomes part and parcel of the business, right? So any financial data is actually embedded in any treasury operations, particularly in banking. And if you think about banking is literally assets and liabilities. But then how do you judge, right, the quality of your assets, right, and what your liabilities should be on the funding side? So here you could, for instance, start combining, right, not only financial data but non-financial data from in the agri-bank example. IoT devices feeding back crop yields, right, which then go through an AI model, which then start looking at bringing in your financial data to determine what your funding requirements as a bank should be, right? That becomes very, very interesting, and that's just an example of how finance actually can become a real strategic partner in the business rather than simply just reporting on the end result.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot. Barry, I want to turn it to you real quick. Maybe you could just give us a bit of an insight into how you're currently using reporting tools over at Lombard, and then if you could also share the major benefits. I know you mentioned earlier that your team's obviously been able to automate processes and free up time to be more strategic, but maybe you can break it down for us as finance professionals.
100%. So we've actually we used a good crisis to make some real traction in business this year. Kept us nice and busy, but so I think the key change that we've done in the last about 8 months, maybe a bit longer, is sort of matured or migrated into a sort of a, let's inverted commas because I use it very carefully, but a self-service reporting environment. So we have a very structured reporting environment where obviously we're getting into the granular data that you know when you're wanting to see the low level transactional detail, big, wide, broad, balance sheets, income statements, management account type view. That sort of sits in a very structured, developed, loads every night through models and that type of thing. But one of the big things we focused on this year was the change to sort of inverted commas again, the self-service reporting, where the data team will build the models and the data access to ensure that it is correct and people aren't pulling data from the wrong places. But then we hand it over to business, and business will do their own dashboarding and their own reporting of it. And we know that the numbers are correct because we built the sort of the middle layer of the models. But business can then slice and dice and view the data how they want, share it within their own team. We've got this concept of playpens where business can spend time reporting on data and sharing it with their managers or their colleagues. And then the power that we get is that when we get a requirement that is slightly more detailed or needs a bit more sort of data team focus, is that we're getting a sort of defined POC back from business who have played with the data, and for us to take it to production is a lot quicker now because it's just about modeling it and building it according to our architecture standards rather than having to define the requirement with business for a period of time before building it. So that's been our big strategic focus this year from a reporting perspective, is this ability to give business the data faster that they can do their own thing with, rather than waiting in the queue for a developer to make the report pink or add a field or whatnot. They've got that power. So, and I think that's worked really well because again, from an EWX and data team perspective, it allows us to focus on the strategic work rather than the simpler stuff from a reporting perspective. And we've seen great traction in business. All of our business teams are starting to use it. The finance teams are quite excited about how they can slice and dice their own data. And the problem is it creates it's a good problem. It creates really good conversation within business, and it creates a great view of what they want coming out, with the more detailed requirements. But yeah, all good.
And it sounds like there's quite a bit of flexibility and customization available as well there.
Yeah, so it's a fine line, I guess. You can wake up in 6 months realizing you've given business too much power and you have an environment that you can't control, versus taking too long to deliver a requirement because you're trying to define it to the nth degree from an architecture perspective. And I think we found the balance, the concept of a playpen for business to do their thing in, and then a very well architected production environment where we're delivering real-time sort of data from a reporting perspective, using the key skills and tools available.
Okay, awesome. Thanks a lot, Barry. So again, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in the chat, and we'll allow some time towards the end of our webinar to address some of those. Let's move on to our fourth point. So often a challenge or a concern is that there's no unified view of user access. We don't have the ability to see what potential risks exist as well. So Trevor and Ian, maybe you can talk to us a little bit more about this, how EWX solves that problem. How do we mitigate our risk?
So governance, risk, and compliance is a really interesting space. We've spent best part of the last 2 years in understanding how to actually build out segregation of duties in environments. You go through, for example, SAP environment, and they've got these really nice tools that sit in the background that allow you to do the governance and compliance pieces. But you take a Cisco, for example, and even though you've had all the mechanisms to being able to limit access, or understand your access and understand your risks in that space, there is no sort of live view of how are you segregating. How do you know that somebody is not capable of being able to create a purchase order, GRN that purchase order, change the supplier banking details, make a payment, capture an invoice, make a payment to that invoice, and then change those details back. Yes, you can have login setting to most of these systems, but you can also switch that to logging off. You can clean that data out, and the tracking and traceability goes away. You want to know where the risk exists and what your exposure is in the space. So we built actually a visualization with probably about 257 different sort of segregation of duties that sit in that space, that allow us to pull that access information out into the warehouse, and then highlight where these risks exist. Which part of your business is it in? Purchase to pay, is it in the finance aspect? Wherever that risk exists, who has the ability to do these types of actions, and where are they? Location based. It could be a small operation that just ought to segregate responsibilities, or it could be a larger sort of shared services environment where somebody's just been on leave for the day, you've given them access to a role organization, and because you've forgotten to take it away, they still have that access. So that's the area we're delving in with the compliance, risk, and governance.
Okay, that's awesome. Thanks. Maybe you can share an example of an organization that you've worked with. Obviously, you don't have to mention their names, but how those parameters and the sort of 257 rules were able to either recognize and then mitigate, or recognize and report on some of those challenges that were coming in and some of their negligence.
Well, we've rolled this out at probably one of the biggest FMCG alcohol manufacturing organizations, both their Africa and their Asia operations, where they also make use of Cisco in those organizations. We've built it out in a fairly large mining organization as well, where we've literally, from their point of view, it's understanding the risk one. It's an audit requirement too, and then being able to sort of mitigate that after the fact. The big challenge that we're facing at the moment is being able to understand, well, what has been your exposure to that risk? You might understand or be able to see it and then fix the problem, but what has been the exposure to it? Have you been able to catch it? And that's proving to be a lot of challenge to being able to tag in the data. But there's some nice new technologies that we're looking at the moment that will enable that for us. So we're doing that R&D in that space at the moment.
Okay, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, I think just the other point is just from a pure financial reporting point of view, because you're actually logging into a system, we can hook that into whatever security protocols and roles that you've got in the organization. So you can implement in role-based security into your financial models. That also eliminates people having spreadsheets sitting on their laptops. I think information security, often people think of it as a technical issue, but often it actually is just a practice. So 90% of information security breaches are not by some hacker in a hoodie. A lot of them are just, I left the spreadsheet on my laptop, and I didn't back it up, and my laptop was stolen. Right.
Gosh.
Right.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Ian. So let's move on to our final pain point, and this is all around segregating roles due to budget and resource constraints. So obviously being very conscious of the year that we've had, 2020 has proven to be an incredibly challenging year for most of us. I'd like to hear a little bit more about how EWX helps segregate roles, specifically around budget constraints.
So we're talking once again about that segregation of duties. And we mentioned earlier that we're a Microsoft partner, and we want to delve down what we're capable of providing our customers in that space. So when we look at the segregation of duties rule set, you want to apply the best sort of mechanisms to alleviate risk in your organization, but it's not always that easy to separate. I mean, if you've got an organization where there's one person doing sort of debtors and one person doing creditors, then they cover the full spectrum of what must happen in that debtors and creditors space. So what are your mechanisms? What are your actions internally that will sort of mitigate that? So you're going to have a number of activities you're going to do as CFO in those types of organizations, or maybe that just branch of your organization, whether it's daily recons that need to be provided, signed off, but to store that information, whether it's in a document library, which is what we've built now in the space. So we built out a little document library. You're able to store all those mitigation practices. And then what we do is we assign those practices to each of our rule sets at a location level as well. We use Power Apps being able to do that. So we are really simple screen, pull up your actual rules, pull up the locations assigned to those rules, and then assign mitigation documents from our document library against these rules. And when you actually open up the segregation of duty visualization, you can see I've got 10,000 risks that exist, but actually 8,000 of them are mitigated by the actions I take. There's a document that pertains to that. At any given point in time, an auditor said, well, show us how you what's your segregation of duties at the moment, and show us how you're mitigating that. Well, you have a simple dashboard that tells you this is the risks that exist, this is the location that they exist, these are the users that it exists for, these are the risks that are actually mitigated. So you've got a problem where there's 2,000 risks that still need to be addressed in our organization. There'll be an audit finding for that, but at least there's an action that says this visualization will help us identify exactly what needs to happen and how we can actually remedy it.
Okay, perfect. Ian? Yeah, I think the segregation of duties is an important one, right? But then so is just pure financial reporting and defining the roles of who can access what data, right? And when you're in spreadsheet hell, as I mentioned before, right? It's very difficult to control that, and typically that's controlled on a file share somewhere on some server in the organization. And that becomes problematic, right? To control that. So, if you've got a system whereby access to financial information is limited, right, to whatever role you have, then you're a long way down the track of implemented information security.
Sure. Perfect. Thanks so much, Ian. So in the build up to this webinar, we received a couple of questions from the CFO community. So one that I would like to expand on is around the automation. So one of the questions that came in was asking about double checking tasks that are carried out with an automated process. So is that still necessary? Or are all those rules so solid and tight that there's absolutely zero room for error?
Well, you'd want to hope that you get to a point where you've checked, balanced, tested, UAT'd all your solutions go out to these organizations, regardless of the vertical. The reality is that there'll always be a changing element in solutions and organizations and how they sort of operate. So you do definitely want to get to the point of saying, yes, I've tested, I've balanced, I've rolled out a production version of solutions. I definitely have the playpen scenarios where I can go and test and build new functionality, make sure that's correctly tested before rolling it out again. But if you're talking about just pure solutions, from that point of view, yes, you want to test, balance, roll out, keep production separate from QA and dev type environments. When you start to talk about the more advanced pieces, you're talking about RPA and AI, some deep learning stuff, machine learning stuff. There you want to make you have enough time being able to train your models. And the really cool thing about it is that then you start to experience models that are now being trained at a continuous level, getting smarter, clearer, and better at being able to handle the actual loads of what needs to happen.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I think just on part of my other world is dealing with banking systems, right? And building out microservices architectures for banking systems. And one of the key, and that's very similar to actually doing financial consolidation amongst a number of systems. Basically, in order to eliminate the manual checking, right, you need to develop a system of what are key system invariants. In other words, this needs to balance to this. Once you've developed those rules, right, and you're actually pulling in data, you can actually automate, right, the check of those system invariants. And if they meet the system invariants, then you're fine. Otherwise, you actually get you pop up a task in a workflow task.
Okay, that's awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much. One of the questions that came in from Matthew Balcom was just around expanding on the real-time capabilities. So Barry, you mentioned that you're pulling sort of daily reports, but maybe Trevor and Ian, you can speak more to that dashboard and around how we see those instant reports.
So I think I can talk to this a little bit. Most, and I alluded to it earlier, right? A lot of finance people don't want to see their numbers changing constantly, right? But often the CEO actually wants to see what his sales are real time.
Sure.
And those two can be split. Right? You can actually say, I'm going to bring in my financials at a point in time, but I'm actually going to put all my sales information on a publish-subscribe method, right? Where your sales information in the dashboard is changing by the hour or by the minute, right?
Okay.
That depends entirely, right, on the capability of the source system, right? But we can enable that by putting in a publish-subscribe bus. So quite easily you can actually have a mixture of these latencies in the information that different people within the organization require.
Okay.
So a good example of that is if you're in treasury management in a bank, right? You want to see what the position is minute by minute, because you're actually making decisions as to how much money, right, you're going to invest, right, in the money market, depending on what the demand is, right, and what the forecast demand is, right, for lending products, for instance.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks so much. So Matthew, we hope that addresses your question. And I see we are fast approaching the top of the hour. We've got about 5 minutes of our discussion left here. So I just want to go around and get some sort of final thoughts from everyone. So Trevor, perhaps we can start with you. We'll come to you next, Ian, and then Barry, if you can go last, please.
Cool. The one thing Price works, it's kind of our motto to say, we take our customers from data to decisions. We like being able to understand our customers' data, how we add value real quick. We definitely don't want to spend years building out stuff that can be done quicker. We templatize a lot of our approaches. You get strategic customers like the likes of Lombard, where there's an exception rule, and we're starting to look at strategic projects. But key to us is quick turnaround times. We want to see sort of value to customers 3 to 6 months into projects, rather than those 18, 24 month type spread just for the sake of pulling time. That's just not our job.
Cool, thanks, Trevor. Ian?
Yeah, I think our mission from data to decisions is really to enable the CFO, right, to actually become not just somebody who records, right, the financial state of the business, but becomes an active part of actually managing that business, right? And so often CFOs are caught up in the monthly cycle of producing monthly management and financial statements, that they never get the time, right, to really actually analyze the data and actually add value to the organization as a whole. Okay. And hopefully by implementing the kind of solutions that we're proposing, we can free the CFO up to become a real strategic part of the management team.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks a lot. Barry, what are you going to say to send us home?
Yeah, I think I would summarize it in probably in two key things for me. One is that don't under-engineer or don't underspend in the time space in terms of getting your data correct, and working and ensuring you've automated the integration of data and that type of thing. Because you do that right the first time, you don't have to do it again. And then you can spend the time where you want to be spending it to Ian's point, where the CFO becomes part of the business and isn't spending his time building monthly reports or waiting for the reports to arrive, depending on the size of your company. So I think make sure you focus on that sort of low-level data engineering piece correctly. And then I think one of the key things I think all businesses need to consider carefully and what the likes of EWX can bring to the table is the ability to ensure that you're spending enough time in, let's call it, the explore phase of data. So you've got this huge big bad world of data. We all want more data tomorrow. Data is a new oil, as you said earlier. But what is in this data? What don't we know? And the obvious analytics in the data, we all know. But what is the data telling our business that we haven't looked at? And that requires engineering of the data, and that requires the right skills to be analyzing that data before you build it. So don't try and build a production data system on a problem you don't know. Go and find the problem in the data and then build it. And I think that's key to all data, especially financial data, whether it's risk mitigation or whether it's just understanding your financial position of the business better or the sales data. Let's get into the data and explore it before worrying about building for a problem you don't know.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And for those of us who would like some additional resources, I'm going to go ahead and share a document now. So you should see that on your screen and you'll be able to download that. I'd also like to just take this opportunity and thank the CFO community and the Finance Indaba Network for being here this morning. We value and appreciate your support and commitment over the year. As I mentioned, this is the final CFO webinar of the year, so we look forward to seeing you in early 2021. I'd also like to thank Enterprise Works for your support of the CFO community, and thank you so much for being here this morning. So Trevor, Ian, and Barry, thank you so much for your time, and look forward to more discussions in future.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Awesome. I see there were a couple of questions that came in, so what I'll do is I'll forward them across to you and we'll aim to get some responses out of the next couple of days. Perfect. Thanks so much for being here. Take care and have a great day further.
Okay, great.
Ciao.
Cheers.